Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cincinnati Public Schools Budget Engagement Session. We have with us today Superintendent Shauna Murphy and Treasurer Jennifer Wagner. We're so glad to have everyone here today, and we're going to kick it off. Superintendent, are you ready?
I am ready.
Fantastic. We also have Board Vice President Eve Bolton in attendance as well, so we're glad to see her here as well. So, go ahead, Superintendent, take it away.
Well, good day, everyone, and thank you, Rob. I appreciate that introduction. Today, we have a very important topic to discuss and to hear your feedback on and to address your questions. We really appreciate you being with us this afternoon and taking time out of your day. We want to welcome everyone here, and if you are on Facebook joining us today and you have any questions, please, you are able to type your questions in the comment section, and Rob will explain and read those questions to the treasurer and to myself, and we will be happy to answer. If you are on Zoom, please feel free to click on the hand icon to ask your question in person or leave a question in the chat. We will share the questions and the responses to you today. All right, Rob, how's that sound?
That sounds fabulous, Superintendent.
All right. So in addition to that, we are asking everyone participating if they would be so kind to give us their thoughts and their opinions via a survey that we have on this QR code you see on the screen in front of you. We ask that you scan that code and respond to the survey indicating your priorities for some very important work that we are doing here in Cincinnati Public Schools. We want and need your opinion, and your thoughts are really important to us.
Beautiful, and I think we're going to kick it off and kick it over to the Treasurer, Treasurer Wagner.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Shauna, for that introduction. And we're going to start off with just a couple of basic budget building slides and then open it up for questions. So if you hit the next slide, please. So what we're doing is starting to build the budget from zero so that we ensure that we aren't just budgeting old things that we may not want to continue to do anymore. But so just to show you how it goes, our target for next year, which is 624 million, is set from the November forecast. And then when we do the May forecast, we may adjust that depending on new information. We're trying to put $1 million aside from that 624 to start building up back our cash reserves. So that leaves us with $623.7 million in available to do the budget. Then we have a list of what we call obligated costs. We used to call them fixed cost, but there's some of them change, so they're not really true to the fixed cost definition. But things like the debt transfer, our debt payments, we're committed to them, so we can't cut, we can't do without them. Fund 34 is another fixed cost. That's the money that goes into a special facilities fund so that they can do day-to-day repairs at the buildings. The auditor fees are obligated, so it's a fixed line item, but the dollar value changes based on their rates. And so those examples total up to be about $61.6 million. And so that leaves us with $562 million to allocate to everything else we want to do. So next slide. So this is the everything else, all the different sections. So just so you know, we have line items for personnel, like our salaries, our Schedule E contracts, and all the related benefits. We have professional services like transportation, and we don't own our own buses, so we hire First Student and UTS to provide transportation for our students. Our legal services, Supplies is another section. So whether it's a classroom supply or custodial or office or computer supplies, we have capital equipment. So if we have to replace technology or furniture, the vehicles, and then the other category is about memberships and awards and subscriptions and stuff like that. So what we did, we went through an exercise and we said, okay, if we budgeted for every person that we have on staff right now that's funded by the general fund, well, that would total about $476 million. And so that leaves $86 million for everything else that I just talked about. So we have some decisions to make about where we're going to invest our money. Keep going. Next slide. So that's just kind of the basics of where we're going. No, we don't. This is an old slide. You don't have to go there. Thank you. So we just wanted to offer the basics because we only have 30 minutes for this webinar, and we wanted to give a lot of time for people's questions so that we can answer them. So thank you, Rob, for driving slides for us. So I'll pause there and just listen to see if we have any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's start a little bit with, what do we find are the biggest challenges we're going to face in this budget cycle?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me, if it's okay, Treasurer Wagner,
Yep.
a huge challenge is the treasurer shared the little over 600 million to start with, but there are so many unknowns with what is happening in Columbus and even what's coming out of Washington as it relates to school funding and how people prioritize education. Year over year, more and more of the public dollars for education that taxpayers put into and make decisions about to schools, and those things are out of our control and they take away from public school kids. And so that probably would be the way I would best respond to that question.
Yeah, so I would say because we are looking at a smaller budget than we have this year, there's some things that we can't continue to do. And the emotions behind those decisions make it hard to cut spending. And so that, and like Ms. Murphy was saying, was the unknowns and being able to pivot when it's known as we're building our plan. Sometimes those changes in the state budget bill happen at the very last minute. And so we have to be ready to kind of shift and pivot to those decisions. Right now, the way the budget bill stands, we're looking at a $10 million loss of revenue for this year or coming year, fiscal year 26, and then another 5.8 million in 27. And so that's not easy to do.
Thank you. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the budget process works? I know we accepted a budget and then we go right back into the next budget for the next year pretty quickly. So how does that process work?
So that's a great question. We are trying to start off with what are our strategic initiatives and the board priorities, because those are the things that are going to drive student outcomes, and we want to make sure that we fund those strategic things. And then we start working on the schools. So the school budgets are built off of projected student enrollment. And we typically use a 3-year history of promotion or retention to figure out how many kids are in each building in each grade and what their conditions might be, whether they're gifted or English language learners or students with disabilities. And then from there, we use that data into staffing formulas. Those formulas are mostly driven by collective bargaining agreements, but sometimes it's state or federal law, and sometimes it's just district practice. So that builds the staffing for the schools. And then we give them some non-personnel funds per pupil, and then they decide how to spend that money. And then once that's done, the central office starts building their budgets based on the direction from the board and superintendent on strategic initiatives and board strategies. And then, in my 31 years doing this work, the total of all those things typically is higher than the target. So then we have to figure out what we're going to scale back in order to meet our budgetary target. And that's always a very big challenge. Next question.
Thank you very much, Treasurer Wagner. We also want to mention that we have soon-to-be treasurer, Mike Guston, with us as well. Mike, it's good to see you, by the way. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Rob. It's good to be here.
And just a reminder, if you want to participate and you're on Facebook, you can ask us questions and we will share it with the panel. Or if you're on Zoom, you can click the hand icon, raise your hand. We will ask you your question, or we'll invite you over to interact with us directly. So we're glad to have everyone here. And if you want to participate, please feel free in any of those formats. So at our last board meeting, we were talking about state minimums. What does state minimums mean, and how does that affect the budget?
So state minimums, like one example of state minimum is transportation. We're only required by state law to transport K-8 students, but we typically transport everybody but preschoolers unless they're a preschooler with disabilities, if they're eligible. So if we went to state minimums, then we would not be able to do 9-12 transportation. So that would be a big challenge. Also, state minimums on, they don't really have a class size state minimum, but they typically say 25-1. But we have staff in our buildings and in central office that are not required by the state to have. So if you start with only what you're required, so like, you're required to have a treasurer and you're required to have a superintendent to run the district. You're required to have teachers in your classroom, highly qualified teachers in your classroom. But not there's other staff members that aren't required. And so, like I used to think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Murphy, but principals are required by the state or not?
Principals are required by the state, like someone has to run the district, somebody has to run the schoolhouses.
Yeah. So I thought I said that one time and I thought somebody corrected me on it, but I couldn't remember. So thank you for doing that. But those are just some examples of where you start with state minimum and then you start adding back as you have funds available.
I'll add on to that just some nuances. We want to be, very careful about the budget season, budget process, because sometimes people get nervous about the possibilities. And I just want to reassure people that Cincinnati Public Schools is an extremely strong district. We believe in our school district in spite of some of the things that may be going on around us in our country. So when I'm thinking about the budget, I'm also thinking about the future, not just the 25-26 school year, but what will happen the year after and the year after. And then when you talk about things that are required in schoolhouses, our board has been very vocal about wanting some things to happen in our schools that other districts quite simply don't do. So we value those things because they benefit children, especially children in 2025. There are a lot of changes going on in this world that kids are privy to. And when we're building this budget, we said we're here for kids. We say we want to take a whole child approach to making sure our student outcomes are as strong as they possibly can be. And so we consider all of those things when building out the budget.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think that's an important point to bring up, and that CPS just isn't doing the minimums, right? We're really trying to take care of that whole child, and that's one of those examples and challenges that we face with the budget. Superintendent, you kicked it off with federal cuts and changes. That was my next question to you. With the federal climate and budgets and things that are going on, how do you see that affecting the district overall?
It has a huge impact on the district because the message from administration in Washington around education, people are listening to, people are paying attention to. There just was an update a couple nights ago, and messages are very clear. What the state will do in response to those things are also concerning because it's almost a wait and see. And so our ears in Cincinnati Public Schools they're really close to the ground in terms of what's happening in Columbus, in terms of decisions that are going to be made. We're not sure what's going to happen even at the national level with the Department of Education, whether that really is going to be broken up and sent back to the states to make some decisions about. So we're very, very much spending our time in those arenas, listening to those conversations so that we are prepared not just for today or tomorrow, but 5 and 10 years down the road.
Thank you, Treasurer Wagner. Mike, anything you want to add?
But yeah, Mike, do you want to add, because Mike is over the grants team right now, and so you're probably a little bit more privy to some of what's going on. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think the news is what the news is, so no one really knows what's going on. But there's obviously concern from the grant side. We get quite a bit of money in Title One, as well as a program called Idea B, which is for students with disabilities. So there's concerns about those. There's concerns about how things change. I mean, I think one option is that, the rules and the money stays roughly the same. And so it's kind of the status quo. Another option is that the money stays the same, but the rules go away, which then, as Superintendent Murphy said, puts the onus on the state and how the state decides to do it. And then there's the possibility that the money decreases and the rules behind it decrease, which would be something else we'd have to adjust to. So a lot of scenarios out there, but a lot of unknowns at this point.
And so Rob too, Mike just reminded me, and I have to throw this out there to help people also remember this consideration. Before the pandemic, our school district had what we called wellness dollars. And we made the decision at that time to use those dollars towards wraparound services for our students, addressing social and emotional needs that our kids have, providing after school programming, increasing supports during the school day. And then we transitioned to ESSER dollars that we had through the pandemic. All of those ESSER dollars are gone. So in addition to the state revenue being reduced for our general fund, Treasurer Wagner pitched it to Assistant Treasurer Mike to talk about grants. There are also grants that we had in the millions of dollars that we no longer have, that we have to make adjustments for because that revenue is totally gone at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The student wellness grant was about $12 million a year. And when they recreated the student funding formula, they put that money inside the formula instead of a separate grant like they used to. And now it's subject to the state share. So instead of getting $12 million a year, we're getting about $3 million a year for the same purpose. And so you can imagine all the things that were in the $12 million grant, how it has to hit the general fund and puts much more pressure on everything else.
And when you talk about this in this environment and the changes in state and federal budgeting, how does that overall affect our local taxpayers? What ends up happening to them, to our levies? What does the future look like? Can you talk a little bit about that? But before you do, I apologize. Let me real quick just mention to the people watching, if you have any questions for the panel, please comment in the chat on Facebook, or if you're on Zoom, you can click the hand icon. We'll share it with the panel, or we'll invite you over. Again, we were asking about how the national and state impact will affect local taxpayers.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. That's a great question because what we're seeing is that because when property wealth goes up, the district's wealth factor in the state funding formula also goes up, which means their state share goes down. So as we become what appears to be a wealthier district, they provide us with less money. So how did that work is for every dollar the formula generates for one student, we're only getting 36 cents on the dollar, where several years ago we were getting 48 cents on the dollar. We're projected to go down to 30 cents on the dollar next year on the state funding formula. So what that reduction in state funding is causing us more pressure to go back to the taxpayers. They're actually shifting the burden of funding education onto local taxpayers by these changes in the formula. And our revenues are not keeping up with inflation because property taxes don't grow with inflation due to House Bill 920. So on your tax bill, you see what's called a rollback. That's to keep the funding from our revenues from growing with inflation and costing the homeowners more money. So that just puts more and more pressure to always go back on the ballot for new money.
And of course, we're talking about a decrease in funding and money and less money in the pot. And I don't know if anyone's gone to the grocery store this week, but everything is going up. Um,
Yes.
so talk a little bit about how that equation and balance is working and what we're seeing even this year in the trend and what we expect to see next year in that lower revenues, higher costs.
Well, we have to change the way we spend our money. So if our revenues aren't keeping up with inflation, but our costs keep going up, then we just have to pay for less things. And so what those things are is the hard part. Because everybody has a different passion. Um, sometimes the state or federal rules make us spend money on things, and then we have no choice on the matter. But so that's where we are now, is trying to figure out how do we continue academic growth and support increased enrollment or bringing new kids in with less money.
And then, Rob, I want to, if I may add on there before I answer that, I want to encourage people to remember the QR code that we have,
Yeah.
because how we make those decisions are also driven by what the public shares with us. And so that QR code with that survey around the initiatives, that feedback from the public is really important. So I want to encourage, in case someone is getting on later than when we initially started, to please take the time to do that survey for us. To be very, very helpful. In the spring, in May, when we had still a gap to close that we all sat down and worked on, we worked really fast and really hard. This time, planning for fiscal year 26, my thought is around how strategic can we be as a team in terms of the decisions that we make. So you heard Treasurer Wagner mention, what can we do differently and still increase and improve student outcomes? And with our district-wide growth plan with the 3 buckets, operational efficiencies, increased student outcomes, looking at a whole child approach, and the third bucket around beyond the tassel for our young people after graduation, really that middle portion. We're looking strategically how we can continue to hit those goals and those markers, and not just random decisions about what our budget will look like moving forward.
Thank you so much. Superintendent, I did go ahead and throw that QR code back on the screen for anyone who's watching. They're welcome to click on that and give their feedback. And of course, if they have any questions for the panel now, they're welcome to put it in the Facebook chat or on Zoom. They can click the hand icon or chat with us, any questions they might have. So thank you. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and we only have about 7 minutes left. So we're going to go ahead and keep this up for a few minutes just so people have an opportunity to see it and engage, so they can continue being a part of the conversation when we're off of here. And thank you for that. So my next question goes to revenue. We're talking about how our revenue is effective, but can we just talk about for a second where all of our revenue comes from at the moment?
Sure. So the majority of our revenue comes from either property tax revenue or state funding from the formula. We do have some community reinvestment agreements where the properties that are tax abated, we still get our share of the taxes, but we have to bill that and then collect it. So that goes into the general fund as well. Sometimes we get tuition from parents if they're out of state, and that goes in there. And then there's some other small things, but so that's the general fund. Then we have all our state and federal grants. That's about $50 million in total. And then we have some local grants. So, if a company wants to create a grant to fund, for example, they're building a new health clinic, I think, over at Roberts. That was fundraised by an outsider, so they put the money in that fund, and we can use that fund to do the remodeling needed for the building. And so we just have in fund accounting, we have every funding source, major funding source, has their own set of books and their own bank account, so to speak, if you can think of it that way. But that's the majority of our revenue comes from either property taxes or the state funding formula.
Thank you. And how does the district increase revenue? The answer sometimes is, well, go get more money. Is that an easy thing for the district to do?
No, to get more money, you have to go onto the ballot and ask for people to help pay for a new tax levy, whether it's a property tax or income tax. And it's not easy because, in this economy, it's hard to ask for new money and get people to agree to another tax. We've done pretty well. The last, it's been 8 years, we're going into the 9th year since the last time we went to the public for new money. And so we had a levy that was a 5-year levy, but we were able to stretch it to 8 years. But we're kind of at the end of that cycle now, so we're looking towards how do we help support our operations with the higher costs.
Thank you.
Also, before we go on to the next question, Superintendent Murphy, if there's questions or feedback that aren't part of the survey, is there an other question where people can add that, or is there an email account that people can send information to?
So I'm hoping they put it in the chat like Rob has described. If there's another question that is not related to what's on the survey, or you can simply email us cps-k12.org, and those emails will be funneled either to myself or to the treasurer. cps-k12.org.
Thank you.
Perfect. That was one of my questions. So nice job, Jen. Thanks for the assist. Can we talk a little bit about, we have about 3 minutes left, how the growth plan is going to affect the budget next year, or how it has, or some of the decision making around the growth plan and the budget?
Well, I like that question. So, first of all, we're moving to a corridor model based off of the recommendations from the board's ad hoc committee, which is a group of 3 people who did a lot of work over about an 18-month or so period of time, and coming on board, looking at the budget and being familiar with the conversations around the ad hoc committee's plan. I thought to myself, man, we have to do better so we don't find ourselves in the same situation year over year. And so began engagement around that ad hoc committee report, pulled together a small team very quickly, and began to carve out what things that we could get done. And actually, we started right away with movement of some of our schoolhouses last year. So we know that, for example, our gifted education programming is in demand. And historically, we turn away about 100 students each year. And really, unfortunately, that is because of the size of the building that they were in and the types of opportunities we were able to afford those young people. So the board agreed to support the recommendation that we move our gifted program to Riverview East Academy, which was a much bigger building, and allow for high school students to flourish more than they were doing in the building that we previously had them in. So overall, I would say we're going to save money and do better with our finances, because with the building efficiency process that we've run through this year, some of our really small schools there'll be more students in a building, creating more efficiencies with our schoolhouses. So that's one broad example. And transportation, we have heard that ad hoc committee said if there is a program of excellence on the east side of town, we want that same program of excellence on the west side of town. So this way we'll ease over time our transportation budget, because we won't have kids needing to travel across the city because of some amazing program that we offer. They should be able to get that same program in their side of town, in their corridor of the city. Rob, I could talk about this. This is a whole nother webinar. So, but just to give you some ideas, there are many things plugged into our growth plan, our district performance redesign sustainability and growth plan to help us improve over the next several years.
And also, it was designed, to summarize, Superintendent, to really help us save money as well, right? To help us be more efficient as a district.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
everyone, that's our time. If you get a chance and you watch this, please fill out the survey. We would greatly appreciate it. You can join us for our next engagement session, which will be Monday, March 10th at 6 p.m. That's Monday, March 10th at 6 p.m. Friends, it's just a pleasure to be with such professional, dynamic people who really just lead the way in education all the time, and especially in the climate we have now. It's just a gem to have all of you here. So thank you so much. Is there anything you want to end with, my friends?
No, I think you did a nice ending there, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We are
Yes.
CPS.
Thank you, Rob.
We are
Don't forget.
CPS. All right, we'll see everyone on March 10th. Thank you so much, and that is our show.